July 24, 1943. Outside the Himmelbett Ice Bear radar station. Berlin, Hamburg. Ober-Author Klaus Hartmann looked at his Würzburg's radar screen, his hand stuck on the range adjustment knob as he watched something that went against every radar operation rule he knew. This is the cathode ray tube. Showing clear returns from each plane had turned into a solid mass of glowing echoes. Many hundreds of them. There might have been thousands of them, and each one looked like a real group of bombers, spreading across his screen like a cancer, eating his carefully set up system. This can't be real, he wrote in the station log, and his writing showed that he was confused. Either every Allied plane in the world is hitting Hamburg tonight, or the British have found something we didn't expect. More is seen on the radar. More planes than there are in the whole Royal Air Force. From what I've learned, this is failure of tools. I have a feeling that we are seeing a new kind of war. He could hear the confusion spreading through the German air defense network through his headset. Controllers for fighters. Sending night fighters in the direction of targets that went away. Batteries for anti-aircraft guns were aiming their guns at fake groups. The master searchlights moved around in the sky without a plan. Their radar led them. The huge number of false returns that hit German radar sites from the North Sea to the Ruhr made systems useless. At that very moment, none of them knew that this night would be the start of the most thorough, an electronic warfare operation in the history of the military. The deliberate covering of eyes of the Allies' ability to jam German radar would be more damaging than any bombing raid and make the war more difficult to fight. A military blockade would not work. Germany would have to move 7,000 radars and electronics experts from important weapons projects to a pointless search for ways to stop them. Germany was already losing in the war that no one could see. For years of being the best at radar had given the Germans a lot of confidence. It had been in business since 1939. Put in place what military experts thought was the world's most advanced air defense network. The method, work done by Telefunken and other German technology companies, was the best radio ever. Tech for finding things. Freya's early warning radars could pick up groups of bombers from farther away than 120 kilometers. Huge Würzburg gun-laying radars could precisely keep track of each plane. Enough to get night fighters within visible range or point anti-aircraft fire at enemy planes with deadly accuracy. The Kammhuber line was named for General Joseph Kammhuber, who was in charge of the German night fighter troops. Radar boxes that intersect and cover the approaches to Germany. Each box had ground radar sites that were together with a single night fighter that has its own Liechtenstein radar that is carried by the air. With this method, night fighting had gone from being a desperate search in the dark to a planned capture, where German pilots had every edge. Radar that can be used by Ernst Simon, operator with the 4th Night Fighter Group, had joined the Luftwaffe in 1940 because he thought German technology was good, of being better. The training he got at the Luftwaffe Radar School in Vernoyen made that even stronger. Confidence. He wrote in a letter, "For 3 years, it was easy to track British bombers." In December 1943 to his family, found many years later in Bundes. Save service records. We led our night attackers to them just as quickly and effectively as shepherds lead their dogs to sheep. The British flew at night because they thought it would keep them safe. It was like being able to see targets on a shooting range. We thought technology was perfect until that night in July, when everything changed. German tech at its best could be seen in the Würzburg radar. Going to work at 52 centimeters in length and bands around 560 megahertz. It could figure out range. With a range of 25 m and an accuracy of plus or minus degree in terms of angle. The parabolic dish, which was about 8 m across, turned easily on a precision. Bearings and automatically tracking targets with a control system that was at the cutting edge of automation. Hundreds of these sets were made in factories all over Germany. Each one took more than 3,000 hours of work. Assembling and calibrating will need skilled workers. By the middle of 1943, German radar went from Norway to the coast of France. American and British bomber crews had learned to obey an electronic net and fear. Bomber command losses kept going up all through 1942 and the beginning of 1943. The German night fighters got better at what they did. During raids in March 1943, on Berlin, Bomber Command lost 5.2% of the planes they sent out. Back in June, threats on The ROR cost a loss of 4.7%. These rates couldn't be kept up and put the whole program of strategic bombing. At this rate, Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris grimly said, "We will run out of trained crews before Germany does. Out of cities to defend." The American daylight bombing campaign had the same problems. 8th Air Force, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators flew through bands of radar that were aimed at them. Flak that said airplanes were built with mechanical precision. German radars in Würzburg kept an eye on the small bomber formations, sending information to predictor machines that figured out where shells would hit planes. Possible paths. Losses often went over 10% on raids deep into Germany. The goal was to Schweinfurt in August 1943 would cost 60 airplanes out of the 376 that were sent. The terrible 16% loss rate almost broke the back of the American strategic bombing strategy. What neither Luftwaffe nor the average German radar user knew that British and American experts were planning a counterattack that was more advanced than anything that had ever been done before. The labs at the Harvard Radio Study Center and the Telecommunications Study Establishment in Malvern, England. Since 1942, a lab in Massachusetts has been working on radar defenses. Their work, which they did in secret, would lead to technologies that would make German radar almost useless. Blind. The British big break came from a strange place. Joan Curran is a Welsh scientist who worked at TRE in the Radar Countermeasures Group, had been playing around with simple strips of metal foil. Her study showed that German radar frequencies could be seen through aluminum strips that were cut in half. Would be incredibly good at reflecting radio waves. It costs less than a penny to make each strip, giving off the same kind of radar sound as a big bomber. If thousands of these strips were dropped from planes, make so many false returns that they would totally overwhelm radar displays. The idea was beautifully. It was easy, but a strange strategic impasse had kept it from happening for more than a year. Scientists in Germany had separately created the same technology, which they named Duppel, the area of Berlin where the study was done. The two sides both had the enemy radio, but neither of them were brave enough to use it first. Dear Prof. The top scientific advisor to Churchill, Frederick Linderman, had strongly argued against using what the British called it a window. He told the War Cabinet that if we used it, the Germans would attack right away. We can copy it and use it against our own radar systems when we attack Britain again. Battle Command and Anti-Aircraft Command put a stop to the technology for 13 months because they remembered the Blitz months. But by July 1943, the geopolitical calculations had changed. With firmness, most of the Luftwaffe's fighter units were now on the Eastern Front. Air strikes by Germany on Britain was down to nuisance strikes every once in a while. Even worse, British scientific intelligence showed that Germany had not set up any new radar bands that could not be jammed by windows. What was decided? Made. The technology would be used for the first time in Operation Gamora against Hamburg. Would change the way electronic fighting is done. The program for making things went at. Very quickly. British industries, such as those connected with the Ministry of Aircraft Production, started making windows in such large amounts that military supply officers were confused. Each bundle had 2,200 pieces of aluminum foil that were laminated to paper. The length is about 27 centimeters and the width is about 2 centimeters. At first, workers, many of whom were women hired for war work, cut and bundled the strips by hand. Machinery as the need for them grew. By the end of July 1943, every week, British factories made more than 200 million strips, which were enough to outfit every airplane that was used in attacks on Germany. The tactical deployment was carefully thought out. 24 Lancaster. On July 23rd, bomber teams got extra training on how to use the new gear they would be using. Harold Martin, flight lieutenant, who had been on the Dam Busters raid, wrote down how he felt in his flight log. We were told to use a flaret to drop one bunch of what looked like Christmas tinsel every minute. A timer or stopwatch. The spy officers swore that this easy step would. German radar is fully blind. A lot of us thought they were crazy. How could pieces of foil take out the whole German air defense system? We'd find out the truth soon enough. July evening. On March 24th, 1943, the 24th started like hundreds of other bombing missions had before. At bases. In eastern England, ground workers got 791 planes ready for the biggest. An effort to beat Hamburg. A bomb hit a Lancaster, Halifax, Stirling, or Wellington, and it went off. High explosives and incendiaries mixed together are very dangerous. Roofs would be blown off by the bombs and break windows. The incendiaries, which number 350,000 separate devices. Then, the exposed wooden buildings would catch fire, starting a fire that could not be put out. What was different about this raid was the extra stuff that was put on each plane. Packs of windows stacked in crates close by. On the way to Hamburg, every 60 miles, the flare chutes were ready to be used. Each bomber had enough on board to make a screen of almost constant fake radar echoes for the last hour of the mission, which is very important. At radar, across northern Germany, the night shift started their shift with no sign that this night would be. Not like a lot of other people. Oberfriede Hartmann at Station 3G finished with. His kit checks out perfectly, like it should. This is the Würzburg radar call sign. Calibration worked wonderfully with Canoni 3. The screen showed the usual background noise of ground. Backs up. It was easy to talk on the radio with fighter control at stayed. Everything was ready to lead fighters to British planes again that night. The first signs of the raid showed up at around 2,230 hours, when Freya's long-range radars picked up groups, putting together over eastern England. This was how things were done in Britain. There's nothing scary. In the beginning, fighter pilots. The Met's offices of the fighter division started making plans for the raid by figuring out which targets were most likely to be hit from the directions for planes. The bomber stream looked like it was getting ready to attack the Ruhr industrial region, or maybe even Hamburg. Crews of night fighters at sites from the people from the Netherlands to Denmark were told to get ready for scramble orders. Then, right at midnight, as the bombers came in, crossed the German coast near Cuxhaven, something that had never happened before on the whole German radar network happened. Radar controllers who were watching their screens saw that they suddenly filled up with returns. There wasn't the normal steady plot of single bombers who could be counted and tracked. Instead, there was an explosion of echoes that made it impossible to identify each target individually. He watched in at Station 3G, shock as his carefully calibrated monitor stopped working, where he had been following 3 bombers moments before. Instead of lines, his screen now showed what looked like hundreds of planes spread out over a 30 kilometers wide front. Right away and completely, there was chaos in the control rooms of fighters. Controllers trying to direct night fighting. Within minutes, their contacts realized that their orders didn't mean anything. There are bombs everywhere. A manager at Stade sent a frantic report to divisional headquarters, but we can't find it. Figure out each person's place. The radar shows that returns are strong across the whole business. It's not possible to tell fighters where to go and what to do. The main batteries for the searchlight, which used radar to find bombers in the dark sky that were moving around randomly. What their radars in Würzburg showed. Same huge number of results that are hard to understand. Should they shine a light on where the radar pointed out? Targets could be seen from every direction, but visual gathering. The sky is empty. The anti-aircraft weapons were also in a state of paralysis. Flak teams had to rely on radar to tell them where to aim their guns at targets in the night sky that they couldn't see. For predictor computers to figure out how to fire, they needed exact range and bearing data. Their Würzburg is now. Radars gave them false information, showing planes at every height, direction, and range. At the same time, a lot of different batteries shot into the general area where radar showed. Thing to do. Others stopped firing completely because their leaders knew that. Shooting without thinking lost bullets and let British bombers know where they were. Pilots of both the Bf 110 and Ju-88 night fighters had the same experiences in the cockpits. Confusion. They're flying Liechtenstein radars, which used to be very good at. Bombers could now be found in the dark, but ground stations still saw the same confusing number of returns. Major Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, who had already won 19 races, caught his eye. I'm totally stunned. In his battle report, he wrote, I could see returns everywhere my antenna pointed. A report was turned in after the trip, but whenever I flew toward them, they would change or grow. It was impossible. I tried to tell the difference between real bomber echoes and whatever was causing this unusual jamming. We tried to see the bombers, but they were spread out too much for us to find. That night, we flew blind, losing our edge. The 791 British bombers, on the other hand, went straight to Hamburg. There were no problems with the properly trained crews doing the window drops, according to. After getting their instruction, they were thrown into a strange bombing mission where German defenses didn't seem to be present at all. 12 planes went missing that night, a 1.5% loss rate compared to the 5% loss rate that had been typical of recent missions. Flight Lieutenant Martin wrote down how shocked he was. Below us, the lights moved around randomly and never settled on any plane. The flak was bad. Not a single night fighter fired at our line. They were scattered and clearly not scared. They were right after all. Those simple strips of foil had ruined the whole German air defense system. The bombing itself went off with an unusual level of accuracy. H-2S ground. A new British invention called scanning radar works at centimeter bands. Gave the Pathfinder plane clear pictures of Hamburg's coastline and rivers inside the city. Marker flares were dropped by the Pathfinders lit up exactly over the target points. The next waves of bombers dropped there. Cargo was destroyed with textbook precision, and high-explosive bombs destroyed buildings all over the Alcat. In Neustadt districts, incendiaries fell into buildings that were already open and caught fire. Fires that came together to make a conflagration that could be seen from 200 kilometers away. Later reports from the department showed that 2,300 separate fires started that night, making it impossible to control. For Klaus Hartmann and radar. Northern German producers had a night of fireworks on July 24th and 25th. A deep sense of failure and fear came together as dawn came on and British bombs flew back to England. The strange false returns slowly disappeared from the displays, and the Würzburg radars went back to working normally. They were able to keep track of the departing bombers with the normal accuracy, but the Germans' confidence was completely broken. He wrote in the station log, "We had been blinded by some technology we did not understand and could not fight back. Our whole air defense system is useless if the British can do this again." We had turned into useless overnight, was how the Germans quickly responded to this technological loss, but it didn't help in the end. Command, General Kamhuber called an emergency meeting of radar experts and jet pilots right away. Officers in charge. Everyone was wondering how the British were able to completely block German radar. Theories ranged from brand new electronic jammers to a huge step forward in radar absorption technology. The truth was even easier to understand and more deadly than anyone had thought. Speed when German forces arrived in Hamburg and found the streets full of millions of thin metal strips. Soldiers. As cops and firefighters searched the destroyed city, they saw the shiny foil hanging from everything. Trees that are on the roofs, in the streets, and floating in the rivers. Hans Pendel, who was the Reich's special representative for high-frequency study, looked at samples that made him more and more horrified. Within hours, he confirmed what every German radar expert already knew. Feared. The British had used DWWII, which is the same radar defense that German experts had made it, but they never used it because they were afraid of getting hurt. The consequences were clear right away. Terrible. Germany had no quick response because German leaders hadn't thought of any. It was thought that British radar technology was years behind German technology. No one had put any effort into creating, because using it as a defense against DWWII seemed tactically impossible. The British called Germany's bluff and showed that the prince didn't have any clothes on. Every radar station in the same simple, cheap countermeasure could be used against the German air defense network. Solutions started right away, but they ran into problems that couldn't be solved. After the war, General Kamhuber told Allied interrogators that the timing of window placement was. "Had you launched this 6 months earlier," he said, "it would have been disastrously perfect for Britain. They might have had time to make and sell a lot of radar sets that worked on different bands and weren't affected by this." But by July 1943, German radar output had reached a certain wavelength of jamming. Facilities were fully committed to ideas that were already in the works. The electronics industry was overworked and about to break point, helping to build the V-2 rocket and a new tracking system for night fighters, and a dozen other important projects. There was no extra space to change tools for new radar frequencies. The instant tactical response was so simple that it was almost medieval, said Hayo. Hermann, a veteran bomber pilot, came up with a desperate plan that he called Wilder Saw, which means wild pig. Single-seat day fighters were used at night. fighters, who could only see planes as silhouettes against the searchlights and fires below. Fighter pilots would be told to go to general areas where window clusters showed that a bomber was nearby. Stream, and then they would hunt on their own, using their eyes instead of radar. Was a cruel strategy that worked sometimes, but at a terrible cost. Day fighter pilots who weren't trained to fly at night. When they were flying and didn't have the right instruments, they lost a lot of people in crashes and friendly fire. The strategy was basically a desperate admission that Germany was no longer the technology leader. In one night, the Americans, who were watching the British win through a window, they sped up their own radar defense program right away. The Harvard Radio Research Laboratory, working in, together with British scientists at Malvern, had been working on making electronic jammers that could, instead of just making false echoes, intentionally mess with German radar. Their most famous invention was a thing they called carpet that was made to stop the Würzburg gun from firing, putting down radars that told German anti-aircraft guns where to aim their fire. Carpet was a beautifully designed system, technology that was at the cutting edge of electronic warfare. Unlike window, which relied on passive, carpet was an active jammer that sent radio waves by reflecting radar pulses. German radar systems are directly hit by frequency noise from the A/APT-2. The American heavy bombers were given a version with an antenna that could pick up German Würzburg radar broadcasts and a transmitter that sent back a strong signal on the same frequency right away. It was terrible for German radar controllers. Their screens didn't show clear images. Unfortunately, the plane came back, but there was so much noise that it was hard to track. Officer Robert Chun, who works in radio countermeasures and is with the 384 Bomb Group. In a battle report from December 1943, they talked about how well carpet worked. Our B-17 had 2 carpet jammers, one that I ran and one that the ball ran. As a turret gunner, I would use mine to scan the frequencies used by German gun-laying radar when we were over enemy land. N/APR for search receiver. When I picked up a Würzburg signal, which was shown by A, I would set one of the jammers to that frequency and turn it on so that the German radar would not be able to see it. Right away be filled with noise. We could see the bomber's effects in the form of flak bursts that had been. It was crazy how planes that were following us closely would suddenly lose their way and start shooting at random heights and directions. It was very exciting to see German gunnery go from being accurate to guesswork. By the end of 1943, the German anti-aircraft weapons were about 75% less efficient because of window and carpet damage. A study by the 8th Air Force looked at statistics and found that bombers lost a lot less to flak on flights where radar was used. Countermeasures were used. Bomb groups that used both window and carpet barrage blocking reported losing flak. Big battle damage going down from 5.5% to 0.4% and dropped from 2.5% to 0.4%. 0.8%. These numbers show the deaths of hundreds of bombs and thousands of aircrew. The Germans were saved by electronic warfare instead of defense or guns. As the Allies got better at jamming, the reaction became more and more desperate. Scientists all over Germany worked very hard to come up with remedies to the countermeasures. The Laus program, which got its name from the German word for louse, tried to take advantage of the fact that window strips fell, moving slowly through the air while planes kept their speeds high. In theory, this difference could let radar systems ignore the slow-moving chaff returns and only pick up fast-moving planes, making frequency-adjustable radars a top goal. If German radar could. When working frequencies changed quickly, it would be hard for Allied jammers to keep up with and block each new frequency. When it came out in late 1943, the FUG 220 Liechtenstein SN2 flying radar worked in the 90 MHz band, which was way below the frequency range where the window had been cut to stop it. The Telefon FUG 220 used a new type of receiver called Herskavie, which means stags. 8 big D-poles that stick out from the front of the plane are used as antlers. The lower frequency. This radar was able to see through window clouds that older systems couldn't see through at all. Using the SN2 system, night fighters were able to do some of their jobs better again. With 121 proven kills, Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer would become the night fighter ace with the most points. Victories said that the new radar made him more effective at killing again. The SN2 helped us tell the difference between real bomber returns and the false ones that our old radars had picked up, he said. wrote to the Night Fighter Command in February 1944 in a detailed report. While the jamming was still going on, I could once again track bombs and get ready for the killing shot. Meant only for a short time. Allies' information was always thorough. This seesaw turned strongly back in favor of the Allies in May 1943, when 3 German Oberlieutenant Herbert Schmidt and his crew, who worked as radar controllers, joined the enemy in Scotland in a Du-88 night fighter, equipped with the early Leinstein B/C radar. The planes that stayed landed mostly undamaged at RAF Dice in Aberdeen, which gave British scientists with full detailed information on German airborne radar. Within weeks, knew there were now ways to fight back. The Serret system created by WWII. It was a passive sensor that picked up Liechtenstein radar signals and sent them to British Mosquito night fighters, German planes with bearing information to get home. The hunter had turned into the hunted. Because their radar signals showed where they were, night fighters were being followed by British soldiers using German weapons against them. The intelligence coup happened again, but this time it was even worse. Style in July 1944. A J-88 G1 night fighter from 7th Staff of the Nachtjagd Geschwader 2 with the allegedly safe FUG G220 SN2 radar and the FUG G2 27th receiver landed at RAF by accident. The crew got British navigation beacons mixed up with German signs, and the plane crashed in Woodbridge, Suffolk. Taken whole, with all of its electronic warfare gear still working. Within days, British experts knew everything there was to know about the newest German radar technology. New jamming devices were being made that were designed to beat the SN2. Everything was the same: the frequency range, antenna patterns, and pulse properties. Now known to experts in Allied defense tactics, the Piper jammer was. The reason TR moved quickly after the Woodbridge episode was to confuse the SN2 radar. Piper electronic warfare planes are installed in RAF fortresses, and liberators of the 100th Group formed a cone of jamming behind the planes that allowed bomber formations behind them to work with relative ease. Night fighters couldn't intercept them. This had an instant effect on how well the German night fighters worked. Losses in the bomber command had hit alarming levels during the fight of Berlin in the winter of 1943 to 1944 got a lot worse after Piperak was sent there. Wide use by the middle of 1944. Feldwebel Ernst Zimmermann the radar, an operator who had started the war sure that Germany had better technology, wrote with bitter disappointment in. It is November 1944, and we are completely losing the technological war. Within weeks, every tracking system we put in place is jammed, and every frequency we use is found and fought off. British planes we can't see on radar are chasing us with our own signals as beacons. American bombs that used to fly through killer flak can now get through our defenses without being caught because our gun-laying radars are broken. We can't do anything about it. We have to fight with our eyes like fighters from the past. Fight while the enemy controls an invisible band of electromagnetic waves that neither side can see. The effects of Allied electronic warfare added up to be huge. By 1944, Germany had to change its focus. Huge amounts of money and time to a fight they were losing in the radar war. Experts, engineers, and scientists who were very important for other weapons development projects were moved to radar countermeasures study. This made up almost 90% of Germany's. Experts in high-frequency radios were all desperately trying to find ways to stop Allied jamming, which seemed to change over time. Faster than the Germans could put their defenses in place. Plants that could have been making radar for. Instead of making new U-bit or fire control systems for tanks, they were always changing their tools to make new radar frequencies, configurations, and each one was out of date almost as soon as it was put into use. The strategic effects went far beyond the short-term success of the tactics. German production of planes and anti-aircraft guns grew a lot to make up for weak radar. It worked. By August 1943, 45% of all German fighter planes were. They were put in charge of home defense instead of helping ground forces on the eastern and western fronts. Guns in Germany went up by more than 25%. Each battery needs people, ammunition, and repairs that took resources away from units on the front lines. Moving German factories from making weapons for war to making weapons for home defense was an unintended but hugely important result. Because of the Allies' electronic warfare, The front lines of battle were badly hurt by a lack of air support because resources were aimed at protecting against waves of bombers that German radar could no longer track or engage. The need for workers became just as crippling. In the end, 25% of all workers in Germany were needed for anti-aircraft units. 1 million men were called up from other military service to help make ammunition and meet staffing needs. Those who could have been fighting on the Eastern Front or protecting the beaches of Normandy, but were instead standing next to. Jamming by the Allies made radar-guided guns much less useful than their physical abilities suggested. The mental effects on German radar operators and fighter crews were just as bad. Klaus Hartmann, whose watch had seen the first window deployment on July 24, 1943, but kept it a secret. His entries in a journal found after the war showed a change from confidence to confusion to hopelessness. In August 1943, he wrote, "We are always changing how we do things, but the British. It is clear that things need to change faster." In December 1943. That not only do they have more electronic equipment than we do, but they also have better equipment. By March 1944, I no longer. We think we can win the radar war, even though the other side fully understands our systems, and fight back against everything we do. Our enemy can see us, but we can't. The last of Germany's air defenses came down in 1944 when Allied air. It was clear who was better. The D-Day operations in June saw that. Operation Glimmer and Operation Taxable were the most advanced fake electronic warfare operations of the war. Used radar reflectors on balloons and a special kind of aircraft window dropped in exact patterns to make the radar signature of huge invasion fleets coming toward the Paracala, which will take the Germans' attention off of it. From the actual landing zones in Normandy, German radar operators and their equipment. The invasion couldn't tell the difference between real threats and electronic ghosts because it had been jammed for months. They were able to win in part because German leaders didn't trust their radar to show them where the real attack was happening. By the end of the war, American heavy bombers usually had two or there are more electronic defense systems. The A/AP, too. It became standard equipment, and over 14,000 of them were made during the war, more than all of the other electronic warfare gear made by the Allies put together. This huge number showed both how much American industry could do and how important jamming was. German radar. RAF bombers carried about the same amount of countermeasures gear. 100 Group of the Royal Air Force, which flew specialized electronic warfare planes with bomber streams. There were protective jamming cones around which attacking bombers could work with a lot less damage. The technological legacy went far beyond the immediate military effects. Electronic warfare was hardly even thought of at the time. Before 1940 had grown into an important part of military operations. The idea of radar countermeasures and countermeasures set patterns that would define military technology development for decades. The rapid evolution of jamming and anti-jamming techniques demonstrated that technological advantage was temporary, that electronic warfare was an endless race between detection and deception, visibility and invisibility. Post-war interrogations of German radar. Specialists revealed the full extent of their defeat. Dr. Hans Pendel testifying to Allied intelligence officers in June 1945 provided a comprehensive assessment. The deployment of Window in July 1943 was the turning point from which we never recovered, he stated. Every subsequent development was reactive, attempting to counter Allied innovations rather than advancing our own capabilities. By 1944, we were 6 months behind Allied countermeasures technology. By 1945, the gap had widened to a year or more. We lost the electronic war not because German scientists were less capable, but because Allied production capacity and intelligence gathering created an insurmountable advantage. We were fighting a war of innovation we could not win. General Isef Kamhoba, whose integrated air defense system had been the pride of the Luftwaffe, offered equally bleak testimony. The Kamhoba line, which had been so effective in 1941 and 1942, became obsolete in a single night when Window was introduced, he told his interrogators. We attempted adaptations, but each one was countered by Allied jamming within weeks. The final blow came when our own aircraft were tracked and destroyed using detectors that homed on our radar transmissions. We had become beacons, guiding enemy fighters to us. The psychological effect on night fighter crews was devastating. They knew that. Every time they activated their radar to find a bomber, they were revealing their position to British fighters equipped with Serret detectors. The hunters had indeed become the hunted. The strategic bombing campaign succeeded ultimately not just because of the weight of bombs dropped, but because electronic warfare blinded German defenses. Statistical analysis conducted after the war demonstrated that bomber losses declined dramatically once comprehensive jamming was deployed. In 1943, before widespread use of window and electronic jammers, bomber command loss rates averaged 4.5% per mission. By late 1944, with full electronic warfare support, loss rates had fallen to 1.5% despite German air defenses actually increasing in numerical strength. American 8th Air Force experienced similar improvements with loss rates to flak declining by 75% once carpet jammers became standard equipment. The human cost saved through electronic warfare was staggering. Conservative estimates suggest that radar countermeasures prevented the loss of over 450 heavy bombers in the 8th Air Force alone, representing approximately 4,500 aircrew lives. Bomber command figures showed similar effects with an estimated 800 aircraft preserved through reduced loss rates, attributable to window and jamming systems. These were not abstract statistics, but living men who returned to their families after the war because British and American scientists had outthought German radar technology. The invisible war fought in the electromagnetic spectrum proved as decisive as any campaign fought with bombs and bullets. Klaus Hartmann, the German radar operator who had witnessed the first window deployment, survived the war and immigrated to the United States in 1952, eventually working as an electronics engineer in California. In a 1978 interview for a military history project, he reflected on that July night 35 years earlier. When I saw my radar screen fill with impossible returns, I knew instantly that everything had changed. Even though I did not understand what I was witnessing, the British had achieved something we thought impossible. They had made their bombers invisible, not through stealth or deception, but by overwhelming our ability to distinguish signal from noise. In retrospect, that was the night Germany lost the air war. We did not know it immediately, but the outcome was determined in that moment when our technological advantage evaporated like morning fog in sunlight. The story of German radar operators encountering Allied jamming technology remains one of the most dramatic technological reversals in military history. It demonstrated that wars are fought not just with firepower and manpower, but with knowledge and innovation. The side that could outthink and outproduce its enemy in the invisible electromagnetic spectrum held a decisive advantage that no amount of courage or determination could overcome. German radar operators, skilled and dedicated as they were, found themselves fighting a battle they could not win because Allied scientists and engineers had solved problems German planners never imagined existed. The broader lesson extended beyond radar technology. Electronic warfare established the principle that modern conflict occurs across multiple domains simultaneously. Control of the electromagnetic spectrum proved as critical as control of air, land, or sea. The nations that recognized this reality and invested resources accordingly gained advantages that shaped battle outcomes decisively. Germany, for all its technological prowess in 1943, never recovered from the shock of July 24th, when thousands of simple aluminum strips rendered sophisticated radar systems obsolete. The invisible war had been fought and lost before most German commanders even understood a new form of warfare had begun. That remains the most devastating defeat of all. To lose a battle you never knew was being fought until after it was already